use TikTok to campaign. Oh, hi Chris, our tech support, you've appeared on video.
Yeah, I can see what's happened there. Did that crash out for you guys? It was my internet went down.
No, I think we're still live. I think it's all good.
Amazing. Right, I'll disappear again.
Sean and I kept talking anyway, so.
Not to worry. I think we still have people watching, so I think it's not everyone. Not to worry. I'll go back to that question again. But does young Scott use TikTok to campaign? Seems like a hard platform to get complicated messages across.
Yes, I mean, definitely. I mean, Young Scott's not a kind of lobbying or campaigning kind of organisation, but we do use it in sense of campaigns to share kind of information. It is definitely more challenging because it's not the kind of platform necessarily that affords itself to that, like you say, that kind of long complicated messaging. But I think there's some kind of movements, like particularly information, kind of movements around the environment and movements around things like anti-racism and Black Lives Matters and things that you can use to convey a sentiment or a sense of what your organisation is about or what kind of information you have available. We also, we've had times where we've tried things that haven't stuck as well. So as part of some of our work around the initial kind of COVID response and trying to encourage young people or provide information around mental health and emotional well-being, we did try some kind of challenge type approaches on TikTok and Instagram and other platforms, and we did work with some kind of influencers to do that. I think what we've learned about somewhere like TikTok is to make a challenge happen takes a lot of work behind the scenes, and actually some of these challenges that you see, particularly some of the TikTok influencers take part in, they have a network, a critical mass, and a lot of stuff happens before those challenges hit. So it's almost like that crowdsourced, right, here's the sounds we're going to do, here's the dance, and here's the message, and it almost like, goes out at once. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to make that happen. And I think some things we have learned is that sometimes less is more when we're trying to put out lots of different challenges and lots of different messages. Like, we need to give it a bit of space to breathe and to stick a bit, but you're right, I mean, it's definitely more challenging to share some of those more like in-depth kind of maybe more kind of serious topics and issues on the platform, but that's where we use it more to signpost or to encourage young people to engage with us on our digital platform and other spaces.
Yeah. I suppose I also see a fair bit of, because you mentioned some of the more political topics that young people do actually talk about on those platforms. I guess a lot of people watching could potentially still be using Twitter as a really big stakeholder engagement tool. And I do still see young people posting quite green activism stuff or really political posts there. There's an audience there, isn't there? But I guess it's quite different to what it would have been a few years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, we've definitely seen, young people are still active on Twitter. It tends to be young people that maybe are quite active in certain areas and movements, and might be involved with kind of organisations, and want to have that kind of profile. I think Twitter's almost become a wee bit kind of akin to LinkedIn, where it's kind of like it's your kind of profile that you put out there, the impression that you make on the world. But also we still do, from a kind of Young Scot perspective, we still do have young people that we use Twitter almost more as a kind of customer service tool. So they'll contact us, DM us on Twitter around excuse me, a card inquiry or something that's a bit more kind of operational. But certainly, again, from a kind of Young Scot perspective, a few years ago, Twitter was quite a active, from a kind of information content team perspective. At Young Scot, we would share kind of similar content like we do on our kind of Instagram or website or other kind of platforms. And we definitely shifted that in particularly in the past kind of 6 months to a year, where Twitter has become more of a kind of stakeholder audience, or a stakeholder kind of focus for us. And what we mean by stakeholder, is young people are our key stakeholders, so absolutely they are our key audience, but also parents and carers and schools and other third sector organisations, and that kind of sector, I think we've changed our messaging slightly on there to be more focused in that area, and that is systematic of the fact that young people in terms of our audience aren't necessarily spending their time there, or if they are, it's for a very defined purpose. It's to get the answer to X or to engage with Y, rather than something that they're maybe scrolling through for leisure time or that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same be said for Facebook, because I guess it's a lot less appealing, isn't it, when your parents or grandparents are on the platform, and it does kind of change stuff.
Definitely, and again, I mean, I think Facebook always continues to be a useful tool for us. We still do use Facebook quite frequently. Again, probably less so for potentially kind of hoping that young people will discover our content in their feed. It's more that we use it because of its kind of the tools and the functionality that it affords. I mean, again, as a kind of a charity, we have to make use of the great tools that those the native tools that the platforms have. So being able to kind of premiere video content and be able to get people to be alert to that it's coming up, and get people to kind of set notifications, and we've been doing that quite a lot. But I think, again, in terms of that wider audience, that will quite often still post that kind of youth focused content, because we engage lots with our local authority partners, who are absolutely so important to the work that we do. And quite often you'll see on Facebook, you'll know yourselves on Facebook, there's lots of those kind of smaller community groups or kind of closed groups. There might be localized kind of notice boards and things. And what we find is quite a lot of our local partners or other stakeholders will share our content to their platforms. So where we might have a group of young people who have a youth club in a certain area, it's important to us that we are providing that content that could be shared in that environment. But it's definitely not the same. We think of it very differently to how we think about things like TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube as well.
Yeah, I see. There are a few questions coming through just around, so obviously some of that stuff's working very well for Young Scot, and I guess in terms of thinking about maybe TikTok specifically, should brands be thinking about using that, or is it only relevant if the content feels young, whatever that is? But
I mean, I think it's definitely relevant. I mean, I think that TikTok does have as well its kind of advertising kind of platform and tools and things that are there. It's something that we are starting to kind of look at as well. But there's some limitations, I think, from a kind of Scottish perspective. Obviously, as a kind of Scottish specific charity, the services we offer are for young people that live in Scotland and that have an address in Scotland. Some of that geo-targeted location targeting is not quite there yet, to be able to push stuff in Scotland specifically. You can do UK kind of wide. There are some kind of options available to you. I think definitely it is worth giving it a go. I think lots of brands are on there and doing kind of really great things. I always think it's worth looking at some of I think Fenty Beauty is one that do like really well. We love Rihanna, but so there's places that are doing it well. And I think something that I'm always a kind of huge enthusiast about is, it's okay to look at those bigger brands, that have that big budget, and you can still aspire to you can recreate some of the things that they're doing, because they're essentially working with the same tools that you have on TikTok. And I think it's worth kind of checking out some of the brands. And if you go onto the Discover tab on TikTok as well, you'll see some of those kind of how brands are using the space. But I do think it's important to have that authenticity. I think the stuff that works best is the stuff that feels kind of real, and I think that's where we have had success, because we've also had TikToks that we've put up and they've just disappeared into the ether. I think it's because people can, we're doing it the same way that somebody would do it in their bedroom at home, or we're all in the same scenario, particularly at the moment. That might change when things change, you know, when people go back, and you know, we certainly had a bit more flexibility to be a bit more creative, I think, when we had more heads together and more people kind of in the office. But definitely I think that the authenticity is really important. I mean, I think some of the topic areas, it's such a varied and wide kind of platform for the different topic areas. You know, I mentioned to Sean earlier that some of the content that I've personally seen for young people, and for myself even, you know, it's such a kind of real platform. When you think of Instagram maybe being that more polished, kind of filtered kind of platform, TikTok is the complete opposite of that. It's like real stories, kind of, you know, real perspective on things, and particularly around areas like kind of body image and self-esteem and some of those bigger issues, you know, that we talked about. Mental health is huge on the platform, so depending on what your kind of messages are, and you know, I think there is a space for it, but I think it's worth kind of checking out what other brands are doing and that are doing well.
Yeah. It's so important, isn't it, to get that kind of bigger picture, and there's nothing wrong with looking at other brands and saying, "God, that worked really well. Let's have a go at that." There are a few questions coming in, Kirsten, which I think are actually really quite interesting. If you don't mind us kind of switching topic for a second, and one of them is about the slightly darker side of all of this, because I guess we've probably all read in the news some of the concerns that there are around TikTok and other platforms. In particular, this question's asking about some of the concerns around policies that are in place. For example, censorship, and how that plays out for the trans and LGBT plus community. There are some concerns about that, and I guess also some, as a kind of second part to that question, some of the concerns that other people have around how addictive these platforms are. You know, I've experienced that myself. You go into it and 45 minutes later you're like, my gosh, where did the time go? It feels like seconds and the hours just vanish.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a balance, and I think that, you know, Young Scot as a youth organisation, you know, we're very, very aware, and you know, young people's rights are absolutely our top priority. Young people's safety, young people's rights are our absolute kind of top priority. But also we have, as an organisation, you know, our remit is to make sure young people get access to information, and so we can't you know, gone are the days where you'd expect people to kind of come to your website and scroll through all your content and things. I mean, it is very much, you know, we have to take our content to young people, so it's something that definitely we're very kind of mindful of about, you know, at the same time as kind of providing information about the kind of dangers and about protecting yourself and being safe on these platforms. We're equally kind of putting out content on those kind of platforms, but I always kind of feel that we are a kind of positive force within those kind of spaces. So it is about making sure that we're kind of, you know, we're informing young people about their rights and about, you know, what they can do if they do have concerns around things that they've seen and things like that as well. I think in terms of, as well, in particular thinking about TikTok, I have spent quite a lot of time speaking with the head of child safety at TikTok for Europe, and talking about some of these, you know, they're a relatively new platform which has exploded massively, and I think that while they have taken, you know, they've given us assurances around, you know, they, as a kind of newer organisation, they are taking a kind of design approach to safety. So some of the features on TikTok, for example, like if you're under 16, you can't send a direct message, you can't go live on TikTok if you're under 16, and you can't send attachments. And one of the things is, if you try to, you have to be 13 to go into TikTok. If you put in a date of birth and then you try and change it, the screen locks, kind of automatically won't let you put in a different date of birth. But certainly some of the things around some of their policies, you know, we had, I mean, I couldn't specifically comment on those specific kind of policies as such, but have had kind of discussions around how they, you know, how they have, you know, they've taken on board kind of some of the, you know, I'm not a claiming to be a kind of advocate, it probably sounds like I'm total TikTok's biggest kind of cheerleader, but I suppose what I'm just saying is that absolutely as an organisation, we take that seriously in terms of where we're putting our content. And we are speaking to TikTok about, they have a dedicated alerts team, and about what are the processes for moderation, their balance of kind of machine and human moderation, and all these kind of things. So there's definitely a balance in terms of that safety piece, but I think that's true of TikTok, it's true of many other platforms, and we just have to see some of the stuff around the kind of Facebook data stuff from, you know, I think that it's a challenging kind of landscape. And I think as much as we put content out on those platforms, it's not the only place you can get it. You know, it's not that we're saying that like you have to sign up to Instagram to get information from Young Scot, or you have to be on TikTok. And I think that's where that multi-platform approach is really important. While at the moment we're not doing that kind of offline face-to-face type stuff, you know, that does happen. We're engaged with schools, we're providing information in different ways. So I think it's when your service or the information that you provide only exists somewhere, I think that's where you could be seen to be kind of saying, right, on you go. As well, our age range is 11 to 26. 11-year-olds shouldn't be on these platforms, so although we know that they are, yeah, so it's definitely a balance. It's something we take seriously. We're part of the kind of 5 rights approach in Scotland around young people's kind of digital rights. We're the strategic lead in Scotland for that. So things like data, you know, privacy, all these kind of things we take very seriously, and are constantly kind of reviewing our approaches to make sure that they are appropriate, and but also kind of listening and learning about what other people are doing. I mean, we haven't always got it right, but I think the important thing is that we learn from things, and you don't get anywhere by being kind of too cautious. It's about making sure we are able to experiment and play, but doing it in a kind of safe way for young people.
It's highly complex, my goodness. And I think when you have a commitment to engaging with young people on the platforms where they are, I suppose that's an extra level of challenge that I hadn't really thought about before. It's gosh, that's a really tough one. I'm conscious of time, so there are a few other questions that have come through. I'll maybe just move on to some of those. The first one is actually, it's quite an interesting question actually. So in terms of the content and the campaigns that you're running, clearly you're putting different content out on different channels, but are you running the same campaigns across all channels, or is it quite tailored depending on which platform you're working on?
We tend to run them across, we have like a campaign or a theme, and we tend to run them across multiple platforms. So like I said, it's not that we're saying that to be able to get this information you have to go on to this particular platform. That said, like I said about some of the native tools and things that afford you to be able to create some of that content, naturally some of that will happen. In particular, there'll be more emphasis on particular platforms. So an example of that is we have a mental health and emotional well-being kind of campaign at the moment called I Feel, hashtag I Feel, and we have been doing these I Feel Like Talking kind of series, like video series, where we're talking about with kind of experts and young people about different themes. So we've had things around kind of sleep, about body image and eating disorders, and we've got one coming up next week about kind of back to school. But those have been kind of happening quite often. If we do the kind of lives, they're happening on Instagram. But what we do is we kind of save that down and repurpose it into additional video content that we share kind of elsewhere. So while a campaign may have a more prominent platform, we don't try to limit it just to that individual platform, as I said, because of our age range, we need to make sure that we're kind of covering all bases, and it's not just kind of platform specific. But I would say that we definitely maybe lean more towards kind of Instagram at the moment for that. I think what's great about Instagram is that again, it's got really good kind of discover kind of features, and so quite often you'll get higher engagement than you may have like less followers, but you get kind of higher engagement and that kind of thing with the content. So and obviously some of the kind of native tools around promoting the posts and different things as well. So so multi-platform is our kind of default, I would say.
Yeah, I suppose that's part of your remit as well, so that does make sense. Yeah. And there's another question here which is around how influencers fit into that mix. So you've got a campaign running. How important are they in terms of helping to deliver that message, but also, I suppose, amplify it within their channels?
Yeah, I mean, influencers are kind of important. We would love to do more with influencers, but again, I think given that it's a kind of industry in itself, the kind of influencer industry, you know, we have some kind of particularly kind of Scottish influencers who will share our stuff and who are keen to be involved with us in a kind of charitable way. We have lots of people that might work with us at a very reduced kind of rate and things. We've been doing some work with Money and Pension Service around kind of young people and money, and we've been had the pleasure of working with Iona Bain, who's the Young Money blogger, and she was really keen to work with us, and that's been, you know, we've been absolutely delighted to do that. And I think that having influencers or other kind of young people, that more kind of peer-to-peer message, I think is so important to us. However, we're very aware that we want to make sure that those young people are compensated for their time and effort, and you know, for a lot of them this is their work, and you know, it's what they do, and they've worked really hard to build up those platforms for themselves. So we're quite careful about the people that we approach, and we make sure that we are approaching that we're able to do that properly and not kind of ask for things. You know, I'm sure that influencers get a lot of asks, so we just make sure that we do that in a kind of very respectful and appropriate way. But also, you know, I think we'd like to think of ourselves as a bit of an influencer, Young Scot as an influencer. That's the kind of approach that we are beginning to kind of think about in terms of the reach and engagement that Young Scot have, and that's why we work with a lot of, you know, obviously as a charity we have a kind of income generation arm, and we do work with partners and to make sure that we can use our platform and we can use our reach and our voice to, you know, to not influencing people. I think that sounds quite negative, but you know, influence in a positive way in terms of here's the information and here's things that you may not have known. So I think that whole influencer, the term, and you know, influencers don't just have to be, you know, somebody like a, you know, an individual with X amount of followers. I think as an organisation you can see yourself in that light as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And so you mentioned the kind of live stuff that you've done, some of the live events. What is the process for that? So you promote it beforehand. On the day people can ask questions. I know that you've had stuff with like the First Minister and some other high-profile politicians, for example.
Yeah, sorry. So I should have mentioned, I think I started to mention this earlier, but one of the ways that we've kind of used particular kind of platforms like Instagram is to crowdsource questions from young people. So when we've done live, so we've had a number of lives with the First Minister, with Jason Leach, particularly around kind of COVID, and we want to make sure that we're posing questions directly from young people. So again, kind of using the platforms in advance to let people know that it's happening, and that you know, we're using things like the Q&A stickers on Instagram stories. We're using our own membership platform and other kind of social media profiles to gather in and crowdsource those questions, and then we're able to kind of put them live. So at the moment, initially we did the kind of filming live, but now we're doing it in this kind of way. You know, we're able to kind of engage, and actually we've probably had more access to people than we've ever had before because of the situation. I think there's more of a willingness for people to make sure that young people are getting the right information. We definitely love the lives. You know, while it's great to get that kind of engagement, and while we've crowdsourced the questions in advance, having that kind of live reaction kind of and getting those kind of questions as they come in. That does mean it's a kind of different type of resource. You've got to make sure you've got people there moderating the comments and being able to answer them and things like that. So it's a different type of thing, a different type of energy that comes through from it. But certainly we've done them through IGTV as well. With we had a representative from Childline on the other day, kind of talking to us, answering questions from young people. So we love that format. We'd love to do more of it. I think some of the stuff we're looking at in terms of our data is when's the best time to do it for young people. When can we get the best engagement, particularly with young people going back to school. We've had a wee bit more of a captive audience, but with them kind of going back to school and how that might look kind of from next week. We will be scrutinising the data to see what works.
And afterwards, after the event, you take all of the content from the live event and you package that up, presumably for other channels, and I guess that's part of the amplification of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important, because I think you don't want to lose any of that great content. And even if people can't tune in live, it's a great way of being able to generate kind of video content and repurpose that and use that. And we'll quite often have it as an IGTV on our feed, but also kind of chunk it up into sections for stories, for Instagram stories. We'll use that on Snapchat, we'll use that in other spaces as well, and quite often share some of the links on Twitter and things. So it's just about us being kind of getting the most out of the content that we create.
Yeah, interesting. I'm conscious of time, so just a couple of last questions, if that's all right, Kirsten. One I would love to hear the answer to is what your predictions. Sorry, call coming through. Just cancel that. One is what predictions you have for platforms that are worth watching because they could emerge in the next few months. What do you think that would be?
I mean, I think Reels would be the main one that we've just kind of talked about, kind of Instagram Reels. I mean, I was keeping an eye on Byte app. So Byte app was kind of something quite similar. It was created by the creator of Vine, and that was kind of that was seen as potentially the competitor to TikTok. But I think with Insta Reels that's come out, that is probably going to be the platform, and we know how good Instagram is at these things, so it'll be interesting to see that dynamic. And I think what's going to be interesting is whether those kind of creators, those very kind of high influencers on places like TikTok will move over there. I know there's lots of kind of, TikTok have announced this big, they're going to start paying creators in Europe and things, they're very much trying to keep them there. I think you mentioned earlier, Twitch streaming is huge. I mean, it's not an area that Young Scot, there's not necessarily a place for Young Scot at the moment, and it's very much a kind of gaming kind of platform, but some of the kind of messaging platforms related to Twitch and things like that are really interesting in terms of how they're taking off. The name of it is absolutely kind of gone out of my head, but there's some great examples of that kind of I suppose I'm really interested in things like kind of WhatsApp and things like that. Is that closed group kind of messaging and how that's actually so influential in groups of young people, well, groups of anyone, and actually it's such a huge way of people sharing content. You think about that kind of meme culture, it's been so prevalent, but actually that's very, very active in a kind of direct messaging capacity. So I think it's interesting, things like that. But I would say definitely kind of Insta Reels would have been and it's now launched as of today, but it was the one that I'm keeping my eye on.
Yeah, interesting. And just as a kind of final question, what is the most important piece of advice that you have for those watching or listening today?
I mean, my thing is just be interested, spend time on these platforms, because I think you're not going to get a sense of, particularly things like TikTok and Instagram, they're such kind of community-based, kind of person-led platforms by the people creating content, that you have to understand kind of how they're being used. And I think it's important to kind of immerse yourself in that, find out how you would use it personally, and understand that obviously because of the algorithm, you're seeing things which are suitable to your age and demographic and interests, but it's still important to discover, kind of look at those tabs and see what's there. But I think the most important thing is to actually spend time on the platforms and be interested in what they can do, and I always talk about kind of looking up and out, like what you know, it's really easy to look like within your sector and say, well, what are they doing? But you've got to look up and look at those big brands and be aspirational to what you can do. I mean, while you might not have the big bucks that they have, there's certain things that you can be inspired by. And I think that's absolutely been, you know, where we've had successes. It's because we've had to be creative and we have to be kind of frugal with the way that we do it. So I think just be interested would be my main kind of thing.
Love that. It's always good to think big. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. If you've enjoyed today's session, we'd really encourage you to sign up for the next sessions in the series. On the 20th of August, we've got 3 of Scotland's top influencers chatting about how the pandemic has transformed influencer content and engagement. And on the 10th of September, we've got market research agency 56 Degree Insight, who'll be talking about how Scottish consumer behaviours changed in 2020 and also providing some insight from their Scottish Tourism Index as well. For now, I'd just like to thank Kirsten for joining us today and thank all of you for joining us too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.